U.S. presidential election is finally over. Just kidding. The battle is just beginning. Oh, it's a song that never ends. It just goes on and on, my friends. Oh, hi, welcome to America Uncovered. I didn't see you come in. I was just singing the song that never ends to myself for the past week, since it's less annoying than dealing with the election that never ends. Seriously, if your election lasts more than 4 days, aren't you supposed to call a doctor? But Chris, you say, didn't CNN declare that Biden has won? Well, I say it's 2020. Nothing is easy in 2020. Haven't you realized that by now? Trump is not conceding the election. This was from a press conference given after the Associated Press projected Biden would win.
Obviously, he's not going to concede.
Wait, why is Giuliani giving the speech? Where was Trump?
This has not changed his plans for the day. The president is still on the golf course at his golf club in Sterling, Virginia. You see.
Wait, President Trump was golfing? Well, he certainly seems calm about everything. But he lost already, right? It doesn't matter if he concedes, right? Well, no. I'm afraid this election is far from over. You see, the voters themselves don't determine the next president on Election Day. The next president is actually selected when the Electoral College votes on December 14th. Right now, all the talk of Biden winning, that's just what most mainstream media outlets are projecting.
Because they don't decide the election. The call for Joe Biden is it? Who was it called by? Oh my goodness, all the networks. Wow. All the networks. We have to forget about the law. Judges don't count.
And that's Trump's campaign's plan. Between now and the day the Electoral College actually votes in December, the Trump campaign will try to cast doubt on the results of the election. They say there was voter fraud, and there are ongoing lawsuits and calls for recounts in key swing states. If only the U.S. had elections like Taiwan, where anyone can go watch the votes be counted, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess right now. Now, by and large, the mainstream media narrative is the claims of voter fraud are baseless. There's no evidence of voter fraud. However, that is misleading. It's misleading because they're confusing evidence and proof. Those are different things. Legally speaking, evidence just suggests something may be true. It doesn't necessarily prove it once and for all. This is something the media struggles with. Like how they said there was lots of evidence Trump colluded with Russia, even though after years of investigation it turned out there wasn't any. And this was something Giuliani pointed out in his speech. He brought out several Republican poll watchers who claimed they were not allowed to stand close enough to see if the ballots were legitimate or not.
Also, when you say that there's no evidence, the people standing behind me are called witnesses. They will eventually, soon hopefully, appear in court and give this testimony, because we're going to file a federal lawsuit that will cover here and Pittsburgh, and we will have as many witnesses as the court needs. Right now it could be as many as 90 witnesses. That's called evidence that there was a uniform deprivation of the right to inspect, which constitutes a fraud on the people of Pennsylvania, constitutes a fraud on all legitimate voters. Any illegitimate vote cancels a legitimate vote. And the burden of proof as to whether it's a legitimate ballot or not, when it's a mail-in ballot, is on the person proposing the ballot, because there's no other way to justify it. Well, they made it impossible to view those ballots, and there can be only one conclusion as to why you would make it so impossible. Because many, many of them were fraudulent.
The Trump campaign doesn't need to prove there's voter fraud to take it to court. They just need enough evidence. They even created a hotline for people to report voter fraud. It was inundated with prank calls. Obviously, not all the so-called evidence of voter fraud that's coming out is legitimate. For example, did you know Joe Biden admitted to it?
We have put together, and you guys did it for our administration, the President Obama's administration before this. We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics.
But as Reuters says, it was a slip of the tongue. Biden was describing the voter protection program his campaign has launched in anticipation of potential legal fights over the outcome of the November 3rd election against President Donald Trump. See, that wasn't Biden admitting to voter fraud. He just gets easily confused and says the wrong thing a lot of the time. So what voter fraud claims are legitimate and which are bunk? We'll take a look after the break. Welcome back. Unless YouTube demonetizes us, in which case, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can support us on patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Okay, let's look at some of the major claims of voter fraud. We'll start with what Giuliani said. Poll watchers weren't allowed to do their job. There are basically two claims here. One is that in some cases, Republican poll watchers were denied access to watch ballot counting. At the press conference, Giuliani brought out a poll watcher from Philadelphia.
I never got past the first identification stage. They kept saying that mine, as well as 5 or 6 other Republicans, their names hadn't been entered into the system. And after the first time it happened, the second time it happened, I had no second thoughts about it being a problem, more that somebody failed to finger us into the computer system. But after a while, what I witnessed, and I said to Mr. Giuliani before, in a morbid curiosity staring at, I felt insidious fraud going on. I felt that we were kept away from doing our civil duty. That was everybody on both parties should be upset about.
The other claim is some ballot watchers were forced to stand too far away from the ballot counting to be able to see. I mean, coronavirus, you know. People have to keep their distance, which is how you ended up with the Philadelphia Inquirer photographing a poll watcher using binoculars to try and see the ballot counting. But on the Thursday after the election, a state judge ordered Philadelphia officials to allow party and candidate observers to move closer to election workers processing mail-in ballots. Nevertheless, according to Giuliani's witnesses and other accounts, that often meant only being allowed 6 feet from the closest ballot counting table. How many people can read the text on a ballot from 6 feet away? Then there's what happened in a ballot counting center in Detroit, Michigan. As concerns of voter fraud spread, Trump supporters organized outside the building to watch the ballots be counted. But photos like these emerged of poll workers covering up windows so they couldn't watch. Suspicious? Absolutely not. There's a simple reason for it. Of course, right-wing media claim it was hiding something nefarious. But the real reason was that only the media is allowed to take pictures inside the counting place. Makes sense. People should only have the right to information after it's been filtered through authorized media. Maybe Taiwan has the right idea. After the polls close, they call out each paper ballot in front of anyone who wants to watch, and they are allowed to take pictures. Now, from these articles clarifying that there was nothing suspicious about the Detroit ballot counting center covering the windows, I couldn't tell if there were authorized ballot watchers inside or not. That point was never mentioned. But look, just because they covered the windows and prevented the public from watching doesn't prove there was fraud. But there are more claims of voter fraud to look at, like statistical abnormalities. I'm sure by now you've seen these graphs showing a sudden surge in Biden votes in the swing states of Michigan and Wisconsin. Basically, Trump was in the lead. Then, officials in these states made the unprecedented decision to shut down for the night. Then, around 4 a.m. on the morning of November 4th, a sudden influx of Biden votes came in. In Michigan, Biden received almost 138,000 votes overnight, while Trump got none. Obviously, it's nearly impossible for that to be legit. And it wasn't. Within 40 minutes of that posting, Decision Desk HQ posted this update saying that was a clerical error. They posted an update that took away about 110,000 votes from Biden and added about 16,000 to Trump. Okay, that looks a little more reasonable. But then, shortly after, they posted another update that added almost 160,000 votes to Biden and only 30,000 to Trump. In other words, those new votes split roughly 85% in Biden's favor. That's unusually high. To explain that, you'd need to assume those votes came from a deep blue county and only included mail-in ballots, which generally skew towards Biden. However, going by data at the time, let's take a look at the deep blue county of Washtenaw. It went for Biden by the largest margin. But even there, the votes were split by less than 82% for Biden. And the votes from there were only about 126,000 total. So the tens of thousands of Biden votes must have come from somewhere else, not Washtenaw County. Now you might say that, well, Republicans discourage voters from casting mail-in ballots, so it makes sense that more mail-in ballots were for Democrats. But what's strange is, when it comes to mail-in ballots, more of them were requested and returned by Republicans than Democrats in early voting here. There's more. There were also other statistical anomalies in the votes. Statistical abnormalities are also not proof of voter fraud. But when vote tallies don't seem to match with previous data or show weird anomalies, it might be worth investigating. Now let's look at machine error. Of course there was machine error. It's 2020, people. And I'll tell you about it after the break. Welcome back. In 2 counties in Georgia, voting machines crashed. The problem was caused by technicians who made an upload to the machines the night before the election. According to one of the local election supervisors, that is something that they don't ever do. I've never seen them update anything the day before the election. She did not know what the upload contained. Hours after the crash in those 2 Georgia counties, a 3rd Georgia county's voting machines also glitched. All of Georgia's counties are using voting machines supplied by Dominion Voting Systems, a company that sells electronic voting machines and software. Dominion Voting Systems. Sounds like a friendly name, doesn't it? In fact, Dominion equipment is being used in 28 states, including the key swing states. Dominion equipment was also being used in Antrim County, Michigan. Wow, elections are like a geography lesson, aren't they? This was a county where Trump soundly beat Hillary Clinton back in 2016. But initial vote totals this year showed Biden was way in the lead, which even this New York Times reporter said makes no sense. And he was right. It was an error. Trump was winning in Antrim. So what kind of error was it? According to the Antrim County Clerk, results on electronic tapes and a computer card were accurate, but it appeared that some of the results were somehow scrambled after the cards were transported in sealed bags from township precincts to county offices and downloaded onto a computer. And so the Michigan GOP chair said this.
In Antrim County, ballots were counted for Democrats that were meant for Republicans, causing a 6,000 vote swing against our candidates. The county clerk came forward and said tabulating software glitched and caused a miscalculation of the votes. Since then, we have now discovered that 47 counties use this same software in the same capacity. Antrim County had to hand count all of the ballots, and these counties that use this software need to closely examine their results for similar discrepancies.
Obviously, that caused quite a storm. However, the Michigan Secretary of State has a different explanation. It was not a software error that may have affected 47 other counties. The error was the result of a user error that was quickly identified and corrected, did not affect the way ballots were actually tabulated, and would have been identified in the county canvass before official results were reported, even if it had not been identified earlier. So nothing to worry about, right? Except that it happens elsewhere too. In another Michigan county, a different computer glitch said the Democratic candidate won the local commissioner race. But then, after the glitch was discovered and corrected, it was clear the Republican had actually won. And that county wasn't using Dominion equipment. Dominion is a partner of the Clinton Foundation, by the way. Obviously, there have been long-standing concerns about hacking electronic voting machines. Back in 2006, Princeton University researchers released a video showing just how easy it was. Some in South Korea fear China did successfully hack their election back this year in April. And in the lead up to the US election of 2020, Bloomberg News said hacking was a risk. And so last year, amidst election hacking concerns, Dominion decided to fix the problem by hiring lobbyists to spin the image of electronic voting machines on Capitol Hill. The first firm Dominion hired had a lobbyist who used to be the former chief of staff for Nancy Pelosi. So is that proof there was a conspiracy at the highest levels of the Democratic Party to use Dominion electronic voting equipment to swing the election? No, it is not. It is not proof of intentional fraud, nor of any kind of conspiracy. But as I mentioned, to get this to court, all the Trump campaign needs to do is create enough doubt about the results of the election. And if the machine errors I mentioned don't at least cast doubt on the accuracy of the results, you haven't been listening. But don't worry, there's more, which I'll get to after the break. Welcome back. So, I'm not saying there was election fraud, but there are certainly things that cast doubt on the integrity of the elections, which are at least worth investigating. For example, what's being called Sharpiegate. Who knew? The biggest threat to American democracy was not Vladimir Putin, it was the humble Sharpie. Some Arizona voters sued, claiming using Sharpie pens invalidated their ballots. However, local officials said Sharpies were fine. In fact, encouraged because the ink dries so quickly. They even made a video about it, starring our friend Phil the Ballot.
Hey everyone, Phil the Ballot here.
Did you know you can use a black or blue pen or Sharpie to fill out your ballot in Maricopa County? The new tabulation equipment only reads the ovals, so bleed-throughs are not a problem.
Wait, who was that woman speaking? I wanted to hear from Phil the Ballot. Anyway, the lawyers have since dropped the lawsuit. So where did this story come from? Well, according to Maricopa County election officials, the previous ballots could be screwed up by a Sharpie bleeding through. And so you had cases where Republican voters in other counties had their ballots rejected multiple times, and so poll workers gave out black and blue pens worried that it might be the pens causing the issue. Or, for instance, Pima County, Arizona, said the felt-tip pen ballot controversy burning through social media is false, while also saying felt pens are discouraged because the ink can bleed through, which is why they specifically don't give out Sharpie pens. So that's getting confusing. Why are there so many different types of ballots? But according to officials, if a felt-tip pen mark does bleed through on an early ballot, the ballot likely gets sent for duplication, meaning an elections worker will fill out a new ballot using the voter's choice that will be properly read by the tabulation machines. And surely there are poll watchers there making sure those new ballots are filled out exactly the same way. Or maybe not. Next up, illegal ballots. As ballot counting continued past the November 3rd deadline, Trump tweeted, "Stop the count." That's because of allegations the additional ballots for Biden were fake, including ballots from the dead. For example, there was a claim that more than 14,000 dead people voted in Detroit, but according to a fact check by the Epoch Times, that doesn't seem to be true. They cross-referenced about 30 randomly chosen entries from the list with the state's publicly accessible voter index data and found only 3 of them requested, sent, and returned their absentee ballots this year. All 3 were born after 1918, and none of them was listed as deceased. According to a spokeswoman for the Michigan Secretary of State, ballots of voters who have died are rejected in Michigan, even if the voter cast an absentee ballot and then died before Election Day. According to the New York Times, these are run-of-the-mill clerical errors that have been used as false evidence of voter fraud in Michigan. Another example, more than 500,000 mail-in ballots in Virginia and 200,000 in Nevada were sent to dead people or pets. Well, I think we all know which candidate Chairman Meow voted for. Anyway, that story isn't true either. Here's what happened in Virginia. The Center for Voter Information, a nonpartisan organization, mailed more than 2 million people ballot applications. That's right, ballot applications, not ballots. It was to boost voter participation. But due to an error by the printing company, 500,000 voters received ballot applications with an incorrect address printed on the return envelope. Here's what happened in Nevada. Nevada, unlike Virginia, mails absentee ballots to all registered voters. Now, these were actual ballots, not applications. Ahead of a primary this summer in Nevada, not the general election, about 226,000 ballots were returned to the election department because those voters no longer reside at the address they provided when they registered to vote. Now, separately from that, CBS reports the Nevada GOP sent Attorney General Barr evidence of 3,000 individuals who appear to have improperly cast mail ballots in the election. A Nevada judge has agreed to expedite the suit, but as of recording, I don't have an update. But the dead voter issue is far from dead. The Trump administration still claims there are instances where dead people have voted.
Let me just give you one concrete example, not anecdotal, but concrete example of what we believe to be valid voter fraud in the state of Pennsylvania. I draw your attention to an obituary listed for one Denise Ondish in Allegheny County, born 9/10/1946, deceased 10/22/2020. Her application to vote was received on 10/23, the day after she died. It was then mailed by the county back to her on 10/24/2020, 2 days after she had legally passed away. And the ballot was then received back at the county office on November 2nd, 2020. And when you go to the Secretary of State's website today, it says that she voted in this election, effective November 2nd, 2020, a full 9 days after Miss Ondish of Allegheny County passed away.
Which, if true, is still just one example of a ballot sent in by a dead person. But in October, Judicial Watch, an American conservative activist group, found that 353 counties in 29 states had voter registration rates exceeding 100%. Basically, there were more registered voters than eligible voters. Does that prove voter fraud? No. Most likely that means these counties aren't adhering to the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, which requires states to make reasonable efforts to clean their voter rolls. In other words, it's just a clerical mess, not necessarily intentional fraud. Judicial Watch sues states for this. Earlier this year, Judicial Watch sued Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Both states were pretty important in this presidential election. And again, Trump doesn't need proof that there was voter fraud. He just needs to make the whole thing seem like enough of a mess that he can get it into court. And that will give him and his team more time and power to investigate. Finally, missing ballots. There have been proven cases of ballots disappearing. A postal worker was arrested for allegedly stealing over 800 pieces of mail, including 3 absentee ballots. Certainly, 3 absentee ballots wouldn't swing the election. And he clearly was not a master criminal. He was caught by federal authorities because he got in the wrong lane, which brought him to the border crossing with Canada. When asked what he was doing with 800 pieces of undelivered mail, he said the mail belonged to him and his mother. However, the defendant could not account for additional names printed on the mail pieces. But then there was a viral video shared by Donald Trump's son, Eric. He posted a video that has since been deleted of someone allegedly burning 80 ballots for Trump. It was fake. You'll never become his favorite son this way, Eric. Here's a repost of the video with the warning.
Yeah. All Trump. You gotta do what you gotta do. Trump. I've got around 80.
How do we know it's fake? Well, the guy in the video never says where the ballots were from. But at one point in the video, you can see the names for city council candidates in Virginia Beach, Virginia. They send out sample ballots to people to help them prepare for voting. The guy was burning the sample ballots because the real ballots have this barcode around the edges. Another story involves military ballots, mostly for Trump, found in the trash in Pennsylvania. That one really did happen. However, according to the Justice Department, it was only 9 ballots total. 7 were for Trump. Definitely not good. But 9 ballots did not swing the election. But it still might be a jumping off point for looking into possible other cases. And there are more examples. In this case from Greenville, Wisconsin, police discovered 3 trays of mail which included absentee ballots.
In fact, in the last 24 hours, police in Greenville, Wisconsin found mail in a ditch, and it included absentee ballots. And also, I can confirm for you that Trump ballots, ballots for the president, were found in Pennsylvania, and I believe you should be getting more information on that shortly.
In Glendale, Arizona, a farm worker found 18 filled-out ballots that had been stolen from people's mailbox. Those are just a few examples. I'm sure more stories will come up as time goes on. Now remember, none of what I just talked about is proof of voter fraud, and it's certainly not proof of a large-scale coordinated voter fraud. But Trump doesn't need proof. He just needs enough evidence to get judges to accept his lawsuits. And that's why lawsuits and recounts are pending in several key swing states. And more evidence could be coming, as Attorney General William Barr has authorized federal prosecutors to look into substantial allegations of voting irregularities. Normally, the Department of Justice would wait to look into these cases until the votes are counted and certified, but Barr's memo allows prosecutors to look into them now. Barr is instructing prosecutors not to wait because such a passive and delayed enforcement approach can result in situations in which election misconduct cannot realistically be rectified. The head of the Department of Justice's Election Crimes Division resigned in protest after Barr's memo. So if Trump's lawsuits proceed, some or all of these cases could end up in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has already ruled that late arriving ballots in Pennsylvania must be separated. Which is to say, just because some media have declared the election for Joe Biden, doesn't mean he'll actually become the next president. But regardless of your political leanings, I think we can all agree on one thing. The integrity of our voting system to provide free and fair elections in the future is more important than which candidate gets to be in the White House for the next 4 years. Just kidding, we can't even agree on that. But just remember, it's still too early for celebrations or tears from any side. Actually, no, tears make sense. We should all be crying. In fact, I think that's what I'm going to go do now. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.